At dawn, the Caribbean Sea erupted in chaos. A single Venezuelan speedboat sliced through the waves, only to be erased in seconds by U.S. Navy firepower. 11 men gone, a nation humiliated. And the world left asking, has this small spark just ignited a dangerous new Cold War? Stay with us as we reveal the shocking truth behind this secret strike. At exactly 6:30 on the morning of September 2, 2025, U.S. military surveillance screens suddenly erupted with a single alarming signal: a Venezuelan speedboat slicing across the Caribbean Sea at full throttle, its twin outboard engines screaming as they carved a bright white trail into the dark water. What appeared at first glance to be nothing more than another smuggler's reckless run was in reality something far more dangerous. Because by the time that boat's bow slammed through the rolling waves, it had already entered an invisible cage built not of steel but of satellites, radar beams, encrypted intercepts, and the overwhelming firepower of the United States Navy. From the very moment its engines roared to life, escape was mathematically impossible. What those armed men believed was freedom of open water was already the beginning of their own destruction. High above the earth, American reconnaissance satellites locked onto the vessel in seconds, their thermal sensors tracking the boat's exhaust plume like a neon flare across a black map. From thousands of miles away, analysts at U.S. command centers followed every twitch of the boat's course in real time. The smugglers thought they were vanishing into the horizon, but their so-called secrecy was nothing more than a glowing arrow flashing across American screens. And the sky above them wasn't empty. At 25,000 feet, a U.S. Navy P-8 Poseidon reconnaissance jet carved silent circles over the Caribbean, its AN/APY-10 radar sweeping vast swaths of ocean with unblinking precision. Every change in the boat's heading was instantly plotted, every engine pulse registered, and even the smugglers' short encrypted radio bursts back to Caracas were already being copied, decrypted, and stored on U.S. military servers before their words had even reached Venezuelan shores. They thought they were speaking privately. In reality, they were speaking directly into America's archive. And then came the next layer of the trap. Beyond the horizon, at first just a silhouette, loomed an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer. 9,000 tons of armored steel, bristling with sensors and missiles, slowly shifting into position. To the naked eye, it was only a distant shadow against the sea. To U.S. Navy systems, it was the anchor of a complete kill box. In American doctrine, that term isn't metaphor, it's geometry. Once a target enters a mapped grid covered by overlapping sensors and weapons, escape is no longer possible. The Venezuelan boat had crossed that invisible line, and when the order came down, there would be no sirens, no warnings, no cinematic chase across the waves. The destroyer's Combat Information Center would confirm the target, align fire control radars, and then, in a single strike, erase the smuggling craft before its crew even understood what had happened. That morning, as the boat raced across the Caribbean, satellites tracked heat signatures, chemical exhaust trails, and electromagnetic chatter. The Poseidon above shadowed it relentlessly, a flying command post in constant electronic contact with every surface and aerial asset in range. And the destroyer tightened the net, its SPY-1D radar feeding live positional data into the Navy's Aegis combat system, creating a shared battle space in which every potential escape heading was plotted, predicted, and already cut off. Whether the smugglers tried to dart north, sprint back toward Venezuelan waters, or disappear into shipping lanes, it didn't matter. The cage had no holes. And so, when the strike was finally executed, it was swift, silent, and merciless. The Poseidon transmitted the confirmation. The destroyer's CIC acknowledged, fire control radar locked. And in a moment too fast for human eyes to process, the Venezuelan boat, a fiberglass hull packed with cartel operatives and narcotics, was ripped into fire and wreckage. 11 men died instantly, their supposed mission ending not with a daring escape, but with a catastrophic explosion broadcast across military monitors. To American commanders, it was a clean surgical success. To Caracas, it was an unforgivable crime. And to the watching world, it was the spark of something larger, something far more dangerous than a single destroyed speedboat. Washington wasted no time declaring victory. Within hours, Pentagon briefings described the operation as a decisive counter-narcotics strike against Tren de Aragua, Venezuela's most powerful criminal syndicate. The White House announced that the boat was tied directly to cartel operations, carrying drugs and operatives meant to destabilize the region. President Donald Trump himself hailed the mission, declaring it proof that America would hunt cartel-linked criminals wherever they operated. The message was unmistakable. The U.S. Navy had demonstrated its unmatched ability to control the Caribbean's waters, and it had done so without hesitation. But while American officials celebrated, the reaction from Venezuela was immediate and furious. President Nicolás Maduro appeared on state television, his fists clenched, his voice raised, accusing Washington of murder and labeling the strike an act of war. He declared that Venezuelan citizens had been executed without trial in international waters, their sovereignty violated, their nation humiliated. And across Caracas, state media amplified the outrage, framing the incident not as a counter-narcotics success, but as imperial aggression. Maduro ordered the armed forces to full alert, parading F-16 fighter jets on crumbling airstrips and broadcasting images of soldiers marching in coastal garrisons. The message to his people was clear: Venezuela would not be intimidated. But behind the images of roaring engines and clenched fists lay a harsher truth. Venezuela's air force was aging. Its fleet of U.S.-made F-16 desperate for spare parts. Its navy was a shadow compared to the American destroyers patrolling just offshore. Caracas couldn't meet Washington in a fair fight, but it could provoke. And that provocation came just 3 days later. 2 Venezuelan F-16s thundered low over the USS Jason Dunham, the same class of destroyer that had carried out the speedboat strike. Flying at dangerously low altitudes, their sonic booms rattled the waves as American sailors watched them streak across the sky. The Pentagon labeled the maneuver reckless and provocative, a deliberate attempt to test America's restraint. And while Caracas broadcast the flyover as a show of defiance, the U.S. Navy saw something else entirely: an opportunity. Because every radar pulse from those jets, every encrypted radio call, every electronic signature they emitted, was quietly recorded and stored. What Venezuela thought was intimidation was in reality the U.S. Navy harvesting intelligence, cataloging the fingerprints of every aircraft that dared to challenge them. Yet the danger of escalation could not be ignored. The Navy had strict standing orders: do not fire unless directly threatened. But when supersonic jets close distance in seconds, the difference between provocation and attack blurs in terrifying ways. A single misread radar lock, a mistaken missile launch, and what began as a smuggler incident could spiral into a war. Neither side was ready to fight. Washington's response to Venezuela's reckless flyover wasn't silence, and it certainly wasn't hesitation. Within days, the Pentagon escalated the signal by deploying 10 F-35 Lightning II stealth fighters to Puerto Rico, a 2-hour flight from Venezuelan airspace. This wasn't symbolic muscle flexing. These were fifth-generation aircraft, the crown jewel of U.S. air power, designed to dismantle enemy defenses before the enemy even knew they were being targeted. The message was clear and terrifying. If Caracas wanted to gamble in the skies, America was ready to raise the stakes to a level Venezuela could not possibly match. Across the Caribbean, the ripple effects were immediate. Merchant vessels rerouted their shipping lanes, tankers shifted paths, and regional governments from Colombia to the Antilles began holding emergency security consultations. The sea looked deceptively calm: blue water, rolling waves, container ships moving slowly on the horizon. But beneath the surface, a quiet confrontation was building momentum, threatening to destabilize the hemisphere. All of it traced back to one speedboat destroyed in seconds, yet powerful enough to drag 2 nations into a standoff that echoed the logic of a new Cold War. For the U.S. Navy, the mission wasn't simply about eliminating smugglers or burning cocaine shipments at sea. It was about information. Every intercepted radio call, every shift in course, every encrypted signal sent back to Caracas, each one became a piece of intelligence. The Navy didn't just sink a fiberglass hull, it mapped part of Tren de Aragua's logistical network. The voices on those radio calls, the frequencies used, the timing patterns, all of it fed into American databases. And the next time those voices or those patterns reappeared, U.S. analysts would already have a profile ready, able to predict movements and dismantle networks before they matured. This is the hidden side of modern warfare. What looks like a blunt strike is, in reality, a massive surveillance operation, a harvest of electronic fingerprints. And Venezuela wasn't the only example. When Chinese A-10 attack helicopters had buzzed U.S. patrols in the South China Sea, they revealed their radar and communication signatures for free. Every pulse and frequency logged. When Houthi fighters in the Red Sea fired shoulder-launched missiles at U.S. vessels, Their infrared plumes were captured and stored, giving American forces priceless data on their systems. Even when Venezuelan F-16s recklessly screamed past the USS Jason Dunham, the destroyer quietly logged their radar emissions, transforming intimidation into a permanent archive of vulnerabilities. For commanders inside the Pentagon, this is what mattered most. A single smuggler boat had not only been eliminated, it had triggered a chain reaction of data harvests and military escalations that now gave Washington deeper insight into both cartel networks and Venezuelan military capabilities. For Caracas, what was broadcast as defiance had become humiliation. Every attempt to project strength only exposed more weaknesses, and each weakness was instantly captured, cataloged, and stored. But the political fallout could not be controlled so easily. In Caracas, Nicolás Maduro doubled down, seizing the strike as a rallying cry for nationalism. On state television, he called the attack murder on the high seas and promised retaliation, whipping up domestic audiences with images of Venezuelan soldiers marching in formation, jets roaring down cracked runways, and naval patrols steaming out of harbors. For a nation battered by sanctions and economic collapse, this became fuel for survival politics. Maduro cast himself not as a dictator under pressure, but as a defender of sovereignty against imperialist aggression. The destroyed speedboat became more than wreckage. It became a symbol. Yet analysts across the hemisphere saw the deeper truth. Venezuela's armed forces were no match for American technology. Its navy lacked the resources to challenge even a single U.S. destroyer, and its air force, built on outdated F-16 and Russian hand-me-downs, was badly degraded. Caracas could provoke, it could grandstand, it could buzz American ships, but it could not fight toe-to-toe. The risk, however, was that desperation could create miscalculation. In international waters, a single mistake, a pilot locking radar too long, a ship misinterpreting a maneuver, could ignite a chain reaction no one wanted. Meanwhile, in Washington, officials walked a careful line. Publicly, they framed the incident as a decisive blow against narco-trafficking, a necessary strike to stop cartel operatives from spreading chaos through the Caribbean. Privately, the intelligence value of the operation was already being assessed. Defense analysts pointed out that the smugglers' communications revealed routes, fuel stops, and support networks inside Venezuela itself. The destruction of the boat wasn't just the elimination of 11 cartel operatives. It was the exposure of an entire logistical web that could be tracked and dismantled piece by piece. In military terms, this is called pattern-of-life intelligence, and it is priceless. By mapping how smugglers react under surveillance, which routes they choose in daylight versus at night, whether they sprint toward Venezuelan waters or attempt to hide among commercial traffic, analysts can build predictive models that make the next interception easier, faster, and deadlier. Every mistake the smugglers made wasn't just punished, it was archived for future exploitation. And this is why the U.S. Navy values these encounters far beyond the destruction of a single boat. They are real-time laboratories, data-rich rehearsals for larger conflicts yet to come. By the end of the first week of September, the Caribbean appeared calm to the untrained eye. Waves still rolled, tankers still moved, fishermen still cast their nets. But beneath the surface, the strategic balance had shifted. America had demonstrated the reach of its surveillance web, the precision of its firepower, and the depth of its resolve. Venezuela, despite fiery speeches and symbolic defiance, was left exposed. Its military fingerprints cataloged, its networks infiltrated, its sovereignty openly challenged. And the world was watching, wondering whether one destroyed smuggler's boat had now set the stage for a confrontation with consequences far beyond the Caribbean. By mid-September, the incident had already reshaped the Caribbean security landscape. What began with a speedboat tearing across the waves had transformed into a flashpoint drawing global attention. American destroyers expanded their patrols. Poseidon aircraft continued sweeping the skies, and stealth fighters loitered just beyond Venezuelan borders. Each move was both shield and signal, a reminder that U.S. power projection was unmatched, and any challenge would be met with overwhelming response. Inside Venezuela, however, the narrative was entirely different. Nicolás Maduro framed the strike as an act of imperial aggression, telling his people that America had crossed a red line, that sovereignty itself was under attack. State media ran endless footage of Venezuelan troops drilling on beaches, jet fighters thundering down cracked runways, and naval patrols steaming defiantly across brown coastal waters. The tone was clear: Venezuela was not afraid. But the reality was undeniable. Its military hardware was old, its resources stretched thin, and every defiant maneuver was being quietly logged into American databases. Each roar of defiance was, in truth, another data gift to Washington. For U.S. commanders, this was the hidden victory. Beyond the destroyed boat, beyond the public speeches, they had harvested the most valuable commodity in modern warfare. Data, radio frequencies, radar signatures, patterns of deployment, tactical reactions under pressure. These weren't just scraps of intelligence, they were blueprints. In a world where electronic fingerprints decide wars before they start, every provocation Venezuela staged became another entry in America's growing archive of advantage. But the danger wasn't only technical, it was political. International observers began asking hard questions. If Washington could destroy a boat in international waters on suspicion alone, what stopped other powers from doing the same? Could the Caribbean transform into a free fire zone where law collapsed under unilateral action? Allies remained cautious, but analysts warned of precedent. If every nation claimed the right to strike outside its borders, the oceans themselves could become contested battlegrounds. And so, the image of that burning speedboat grew into something much larger than 11 dead smugglers. It became a test of sovereignty, a measure of American resolve, and a warning to adversaries across the globe. For Washington, it was proof that no cartel, no network, no hostile state could operate beyond reach. For Caracas, it was humiliation wrapped in rhetoric, defiance masking weakness. And for the watching world, it was a dangerous reminder that in an era defined by surveillance networks and precision firepower, even the smallest spark at sea can ignite waves of confrontation, with consequences far beyond the horizon. Because the truth is simple. In modern warfare, the battlefield is no longer just land, sea, or air, it is data. And the side that controls the data controls the fight.